The wind screamed across the open prairie, carrying with it the bite of cold rain and the smell of thunder. Lightning flashed over the hills, splitting the dark sky wide open for a heartbeat before drowning everything in shadow again. Luke Callahan leaned low over his saddle, his hat brim pulled down, his coat already soaked through. The storm had rolled in faster than any he'd seen that season, and all he wanted was to get his herd secured before the worst of it hit. But then, through the blur of rain, a thin column of smoke caught his eye, rising from the old hunting cabin on the far side of his property. He slowed his horse, squinting through the downpour. That cabin had been abandoned for years. Nobody had any business being there. His hand went instinctively to the rifle strapped to his saddle as he rode closer, mud splashing up the horse's flanks with every stride. The sight that met him through the flickering light of the window stopped him cold, a figure kneeling near the hearth, cloaked in shadow but unmistakably human. He dismounted in one motion and stomped to the porch, boots sinking in the mud. With a hard shove, he threw open the door, wind and rain swirling in behind him. "Get inside, widow," he barked, voice cutting through the roar of the storm. The woman turned sharply, clutching the shawl around her shoulders. Her face, lit by the trembling firelight, was pale but proud, her eyes a piercing green that glimmered even in the half-dark. She looked nothing like the beggars or drifters he sometimes found trespassing on his land. She was tired, yes, and cold, but there was strength there, quiet and unyielding. "Inside where?" she snapped, lifting her chin slightly. "This is inside, unless you mean that big house of yours up the hill." Luke scowled, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat. "That's my cabin. Ain't safe here. Chimneys cracked, roofs half gone, and that storm'll flood the valley before dawn. You'll freeze." She stood slowly, straightening her soaked dress, her voice soft but steady. "I've been freezing a long time, Mr. Callahan. One more night won't make much difference." Something about the way she said his name made him pause. He hadn't told her who he was. He took a step closer, his boots creaking on the warped floorboards. "You know me, everyone around here knows the Callahan Ranch," she said, eyes flickering toward the window. "And you're the only man stubborn enough to be riding through this storm." He studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit, but all he found was exhaustion. She wasn't lying, she was just alone. "You got a name?" he asked. "Sarah Whitmore," she answered after a moment, tightening the shawl around her. "I'm no thief, rancher. I only came here for shelter before the rain started." He hesitated, the old instinct to distrust strangers warring with something else he couldn't name. Her voice had a familiar softness to it, like a memory buried under years of dust. "Well, Sarah Whitmore," he said finally, "you can't stay here. The river'll rise by midnight. You're comin' with me." She frowned, shaking her head. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Luke turned away, pulling his hat down tighter. "'Cause I don't want another body on my land," he muttered. Then, glancing back at her, he added quietly, "Now move." Outside, the storm was merciless. She followed him hesitantly, her boots sinking deep into the mud. The rain hit her like needles, her breath coming in sharp gasps as they climbed the ridge toward the ranch house. By the time they reached the porch, both were drenched and trembling. He opened the heavy door, letting her step into the dim warmth of the main room. The fire still burned low in the hearth, casting golden light across the polished wood. Without looking at her, he pulled a blanket from the shelf and tossed it toward her. "Dry off," he said gruffly. Sarah stood there for a moment, staring at him, this hard, broad-shouldered man who'd barked at her in the storm but brought her to safety all the same. She could see, beneath that cold exterior, a loneliness that matched her own. And though neither said another word, the air between them felt charged, as if both sensed that this storm had brought more than rain. It had brought two broken pasts colliding again, whether they knew it yet or not. The night settled heavy and quiet over the Callahan Ranch. The storm had passed, leaving behind a damp chill that clung to the air and the faint drip of rain from the eaves. Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth, throwing shadows across the worn floorboards. Luke sat in the old armchair by the window, the brim of his hat resting on his knee. Across the room, Sarah lay on the couch, wrapped in a wool blanket. Her breathing was soft, steady, finally at peace after a long, hard night. But Luke couldn't rest, his mind churned with questions that wouldn't settle. That name, Sarah Whitmore, it stirred something deep in him, something he hadn't thought about in years. He poured himself a cup of coffee, staring into the fire as the bitter steam rose. Outside, the prairie stretched dark and endless, the world clean and still after the storm. But inside him, old memories began to stir like dust devils in dry wind. He remembered another storm, no rain that time, just fire. 10 years ago, during the dry season, lightning had struck near the south ridge. The blaze had moved fast, swallowing grass and trees in minutes. He'd been trapped on horseback, trying to lead his cattle to safety, when a burning branch spooked his mare. He'd been thrown, hit his head, and everything went black. He could still smell the smoke, still feel the searing heat on his skin. He'd woken near a stream, coughing, unable to move. A figure had been kneeling over him, splashing cool water on his face. He'd tried to open his eyes, but the smoke burned too much. All he remembered was a soft voice saying, "You're going to be all right. Just stay still." A woman's voice. Luke's eyes flicked toward Sarah, sleeping by the fire. Her hair had dried in soft waves, her face gentle in the glow of the embers. He could almost hear that same voice echoing through the smoke again. He stood up suddenly, setting his cup down with a soft clink. "Sarah," he said quietly. She stirred, blinking awake, her eyes still fogged with sleep. "Luke," he hesitated, his heart pounding as he stepped closer. "That fire on the south ridge, 10 years ago. You remember it?" Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. Her gaze fell to the floor, the faintest tremor passing over her hands. "I was trapped there," he continued, voice low. "Barely made it out alive. Someone pulled me from the creek bed, a woman. I never saw her face. Just her voice." He swallowed hard, searching her eyes. "Was it you?" For a long moment, the only sound was the whisper of the fire. Then she nodded once, slowly. "You were half conscious. I didn't think you'd remember. I was living near the ridge then, before my husband passed. I saw the smoke, rode out with a bucket and a prayer." Luke stared at her, the weight of realization settling deep in his chest. "You saved my life," he said hoarsely. "I've thought about that day more times than I can count, wondering who she was. I owe you everything." Sarah shook her head gently. "No one owes me anything, Luke. You were just a man in need of help. I did what anyone would have done." He let out a bitter laugh. "Anyone? There weren't many folks left out there that day, Sarah. That fire scared the whole valley off. You could have died too." She looked into his eyes then, and for the first time since she'd come through his door, the walls between them seemed to crumble. "Maybe I needed saving too," she whispered. The fire popped softly, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Luke knelt beside her, his hat forgotten on the floor, his calloused hand resting near hers but not quite touching. "I barked orders at you tonight like a fool," he said. "Didn't even realize I was shouting at the woman who gave me back my life." Sarah smiled faintly, her eyes shimmering in the firelight. "You've been through storms of your own, rancher. Maybe this one just blew the past back to where it belonged." Luke's throat tightened. He looked at her, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone his life had somehow circled back to. "You don't have to go tomorrow," he said quietly. "Stay, for a while." She hesitated, watching the sincerity in his face. "And if I stay," he smiled, small, tired, but genuine, "then maybe we both stop running from the ghosts we've carried too long." Outside, the first faint light of dawn crept across the horizon, turning the wet fields to silver. Inside, two souls who had once met in fire now sat by a quiet flame, the silence between them no longer cold but filled with the warmth of something reborn, something that had waited a decade to find its way home.